It was a quiet Texas evening, the kind where the sky glows orange and the roads stretch out for miles without a sound. Chuck Norris was driving home from a charity event, wearing nothing but a faded cap, an old denim jacket, and simple boots. No security, no entourage, no cameras. Just Chuck, his old pickup truck, and the peaceful hum of the road. He had just taken a turn toward a small suburban neighborhood when blue and red lights suddenly exploded behind him. A patrol car raced up so fast that Chuck had to brake hard to avoid getting hit. Before he could even process what was happening, a voice blasted through the police loudspeaker. "Driver, pull over." Now, Chuck calmly steered to the side. He wasn't speeding, wasn't breaking any laws, but he'd been in enough real-world situations to know when something was off. The officer stepped out aggressively, slamming his door, hand already resting on his gun as he marched toward the truck. Chuck kept both hands on the wheel, polite and composed. The officer barked, "Hands where I can see them." Chuck didn't move except to very slowly raise his hands. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" But recognition wasn't on the cop's agenda. He wasn't paying attention to Chuck's face. All he saw was an older man in a worn-out truck and assumed the worst. "Step out of the vehicle," the cop shouted. Before Chuck could respond, the officer yanked the door open. A few people walking nearby stopped, startled by the aggressive tone. One man holding groceries froze mid-step. A woman jogging paused her music. A teenager on a bicycle pulled out his phone, already sensing something wasn't right. Chuck stepped out slowly, keeping calm. "Officer," he said gently, "I'd like to understand what's going on." Instead of answering, the cop shoved him back against the truck, shouting, "Don't play smart with me. I know your type." The crowd gasped. A few more phones were pointed in their direction. Chuck didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even frown. He simply looked the officer in the eyes with the quiet strength that had carried him through decades of action, training, and discipline. No one watching had any idea that within the next 5 minutes, everything was about to flip upside down. The atmosphere shifted the moment Chuck Norris stepped out of the truck. The officer's eyes narrowed, scanning him up and down, but not with recognition, only suspicion and hostility. It was the kind of look someone gives when they've already decided you're guilty of something. They just haven't chosen what yet. Chuck kept both hands visible, palms open, showing he had nothing to hide. "Officer," Chuck repeated calmly, "I'm cooperating. Please tell me what this is about." But the officer didn't want explanations. He wanted control. He stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward Chuck's chest. "I said don't talk unless I ask you to talk. Do you understand me?" A few people in the small crowd exchanged shocked glances. One of them whispered, "Why is he shouting like that?" The old man didn't even do anything. Another bystander, the teenager with the bicycle, filmed the whole interaction from a safe distance. He zoomed in, confused and concerned. "This feels wrong," he murmured under his breath. Chuck took a slow breath. He had faced tougher men, more dangerous situations, and tighter corners in his long life. But every time, calmness was his weapon. Anger only made things worse. "I understand," Chuck said softly. But the officer was irritated by the calmness. Bullies usually are. He walked around Chuck in a tight circle, inspecting him like a suspect. "What are you doing out here this late?" he demanded. "Driving home," Chuck answered. "From where?" "From a charity event." "Don't lie to me," the officer barked, stepping in close again. Chuck didn't flinch. "I'm not lying," the crowd murmured. A woman yelled out, "He's cooperating." "Why are you yelling at him?" The cop whipped his head around, shouting at the crowd, "Everyone back off. This is a police matter." But people didn't back off. Instead, more started recording. Chuck could feel the tension tightening around them like a rope. He didn't want conflict. He didn't want drama. But he also knew that backing down wasn't the answer, not when someone abused authority. The officer leaned closer, his voice low and threatening. "You look like someone who's hiding something. Drugs? Weapons? Fake ID? I've seen your kind before." "My kind?" Chuck asked, still calm, but his eyebrows lifted slightly. "Old guys in beat-up trucks who think the rules don't apply to them," the officer snapped. Chuck could have said 1,000 things. Could have revealed exactly who he was. Could have ended the entire confrontation with a single name. But he didn't. Chuck believed in teaching lessons through patience, not ego. "I follow the rules," Chuck said quietly. "And I respect the law." The officer scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "Yeah? Then prove it. Hands behind your back." "Now." Gasp shot through the crowd. What? What? He didn't do anything. You can't just arrest him for no reason. The cop ignored them, grabbing Chuck by the arm. Chuck didn't resist, but his voice remained steady, controlled. Officer, I would appreciate knowing why I'm being detained. You're being detained because I said so. Phones recorded from every angle now. The teenage boy filming whispered, "Man, this is gonna go viral." Chuck stood there, shoulders relaxed, eyes focused not on the officer's anger, but on the growing fear in the crowd. People were truly scared of what might happen next. The officer walked back to his squad car, pretending to run Chuck's license, but really just stalling. He glared at the computer screen, jaw clenched tight. He was looking for anything, any excuse, to justify his aggression. But nothing came up. Clean record. Clear license. A perfectly legal stop. No grounds for arrest. This only made him angrier. "You're not fooling me," he muttered to himself. "You're hiding something. I can feel it." He stormed back toward Chuck. "You step out of line one more time," he growled, "and I swear." Just then, another bystander, a middle-aged man, stepped forward nervously. "Officer," he said, "I think you've made a mistake. That man didn't do anything." The cop snapped. "Do you want to get arrested too?" "Back off." Chuck closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. Things were spiraling out of control. And still, he stayed centered. "Officer," Chuck said, "you're escalating a situation that doesn't need escalation." The cop's nostrils flared. "What did you just say to me?" "I said you're escalating." "Shut up," he shouted, stepping into Chuck's face. The crowd had enough. They started shouting back. "Calm down. He's cooperating. You're abusing power." People were scared, angry, and confused, and their voices rose in a wave of protest. The officer turned, ready to bark orders again. But the sight of a dozen cameras pointing at him made his expression twitch with nervousness. For the first time since the stop, he looked unsure. Chuck noticed it. The crowd noticed it. But no one dared move. The moment hung heavy in the air. And what happened next would change the entire direction of the night. Before we continue, tell me, what country and city are you watching this story from? Let's see how far Chuck's message reaches. The air around the small suburban street felt electric. Tension hummed like a live wire. Bystanders who had gathered earlier now clustered closer, phones raised, their eyes darting between Chuck Norris and the police officer, unsure if the next moment would erupt into violence. The officer's hand twitched near his holster. His face was red, veins popping. Every fiber in his body screamed control. But control was already slipping through his fingers. He hadn't anticipated Chuck's calm. The calm of a man who had faced far worse than this. A man whose reputation for strength was legendary, yet whose patience was even greater. "Step aside." The officer barked at Chuck, his voice trembling slightly with anger and embarrassment. "Step aside or I'll, his words faltered. For the first time, the crowd sensed the fear hiding beneath the bravado. Chuck's eyes didn't leave the officer's face. His hands were still visible, slowly raising slightly in a non-threatening gesture. "Officer," he said, calm but firm, "there's no reason for this to escalate. Let's solve this peacefully." But the officer wasn't listening. He yanked his firearm from its holster, pressing it toward Chuck's chest. Gasps echoed from the crowd. A woman screamed. Children clutched their parents' arms. The teenager filming froze, his phone shaking in his hands. "Oh my God! He just pulled a gun," he muttered wide-eyed. Chuck stayed still. Not a flinch. Not a blink. Years of discipline and combat experience had taught him that panic would never save a life. Calm would. He tilted his head slightly, making direct eye contact with the officer. "You don't need to use that," Chuck said quietly, his voice low but commanding. "I am cooperating. You have no reason to threaten me." The officer's grip on the gun tightened. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted. At that moment, someone in the crowd finally realized who they were dealing with. A young man, pointing at Chuck, whispered loudly enough for the people nearest him to hear. "Wait, is that Chuck Norris? The Chuck Norris." The words rippled through the crowd. Phones moved to record angles closer to Chuck. Murmurs grew into whispers. "Oh my God, it's him." The officer froze for a split second, unsure whether to acknowledge the name. But pride and fear clashed inside him. He refused to admit he had no idea who he was pointing a gun at. His voice wavered as he barked again. "Hands behind your back now." Chuck raised an eyebrow, his calm unwavering. "I have my hands raised, officer." But you're escalating a situation that doesn't need escalation. The tension in the street was unbearable. The crowd's fear turned into panic. Some shouted, some pleaded, some simply filmed. "Put the gun down," yelled a middle-aged man from the sidewalk. "He hasn't done anything." "Back off," the officer snapped, swinging the gun slightly toward the protesting bystander. Chuck's eyes swept across the crowd, measuring their fear. Then he focused back on the officer. Calm, unshakable, and quietly commanding, he said. "Look at everyone here. Look at how tense you're making them. Now, step back and ask yourself, is this how an officer should behave?" The officer's hands shook. His face flushed a deeper shade of red. For the first time, he felt the weight of every eye on him. The crowd, the cameras, the whispers, all pointed at him. Chuck could see the doubt creeping into the officer's mind. He didn't need to fight. He didn't need to argue. His mere presence, his discipline, his control, all were enough. The officer barked one more time, but the gun hand wavered. He glanced nervously at the bystanders. He saw the phones recording every angle, capturing every detail of his aggression. The power dynamic that he thought he had, authority, control, fear, was slipping. Fast. Chuck's gaze didn't leave him. One simple sentence, calm but firm, cut through the tension like a blade. "Respect is earned, not forced." The words echoed, and the crowd reacted. "Yeah, that's right," someone shouted. Others nodded. Phones captured everything. The officer's anger mixed with embarrassment, confusion, and fear. He was losing control. Every instinct told him to act out, to assert dominance. But the presence of Chuck Norris, the realization of the crowd, and the undeniable truth of his misconduct made him hesitate. And that hesitation was all it took. If a cop pulled a gun on you by mistake, would you stay calm like Chuck or react? Comment your answer below. I want to see your thoughts. The moment seemed to stretch in slow motion. Chuck Norris stood on the sidewalk, calm, composed, and perfectly still, his hands raised slightly. The officer, gun still drawn, was sweating under the weight of his own escalating aggression. His chest heaved as he tried to maintain authority, but every second brought him closer to losing control completely. Then it happened. A teenage boy at the edge of the crowd, gripping his phone like a lifeline, suddenly shouted, "Wait, is that Chuck Norris? The Chuck Norris?" The words cut through the tension like lightning. Instantly, heads turned. Phones raised. People pushed closer, craning to see the man who had just been threatened by the officer. Whispers spread. "No way. That's him, the martial arts legend. OMG, that's Chuck Norris." The officer froze. He blinked rapidly, unable to process the revelation. His hand still hovered over the gun, but doubt began creeping in. The crowd's energy shifted. Fear turned into awe, and awe began to hum with disapproval. "Sir, do you know who you're dealing with?" a bystander asked cautiously, holding up their phone. The officer's face flushed crimson. I, he stammered. Pride and embarrassment collided violently inside him. He had been so sure of his authority, so convinced of his control, and now the world seemed to be staring back at him, judging every twitch, every command, every misstep. Chuck didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply remained calm, his eyes steady, his posture unwavering. The kind of calm that comes from decades of experience, discipline, and knowing exactly who you are. "Officer," Chuck said, his voice soft but commanding, "there's no reason for this escalation. You know I have done nothing wrong. Let's resolve this peacefully." The crowd murmured in agreement. "Yeah, let him go. Stop threatening him." "Are you serious? That's Chuck Norris." The officer's hand began to shake slightly. The gun, which had moments ago symbolized power, now trembled in his grasp. For the first time, he felt the reality of the situation, not just the man in front of him, but the hundreds of eyes on him, capturing every second, every movement, every irrational decision. A woman from the crowd shouted, "You're embarrassing yourself." The officer turned, anger mixing with shame. His authoritative stance faltered. He took a step back, almost instinctively. Chuck's calmness was magnetic. The crowd could feel it, and they began to take a collective breath. The fear that had gripped them moments ago was transforming into a quiet but powerful sense of justice. Someone near the street joked nervously, "I can't believe this is happening. Chuck Norris, getting pulled over, like some random guy." Chuck's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile, but he said nothing. He knew the lesson would be louder without words. The officer, now acutely aware that he was being judged not only by Chuck but by the crowd and the cameras, tried to regain control. "Hands behind your back," he barked, his voice cracking slightly. The crowd reacted immediately. Phones were pointed at him. Bystanders shouted, "He's cooperating. Stop threatening him. Put the gun down. You're abusing your power." The officer's mind raced. He knew he was in trouble. He knew the cameras had every angle. His authority, which had felt so absolute moments ago, was evaporating under the weight of public scrutiny and Chuck's composed presence. Chuck raised his hands slightly higher, palms open, non-threatening. "Officer," he said evenly, "every action has a consequence. Threatening someone unjustly is not how respect is earned." The crowd leaned in, drawn to every word. Their fear now mixed with admiration. Admiration for a man who didn't need to fight to assert dominance, a man who was calm, confident, and dignified even under threat. A young woman in the crowd whispered, "I've never seen anyone stay so calm under a gun." The officer's hands shook more noticeably now. His chest heaved. Sweat streamed down his forehead. His eyes darted to the crowd, then to the camera phones, then back at Chuck. Panic was beginning to replace aggression. Chuck took a slow, deliberate step forward, not threatening, just steady. His presence alone was enough to shift the power dynamic. "You can't force respect with fear," Chuck said quietly, "but you can lose it in a second." The crowd murmured, repeating the words, recording every moment. Every phone, every lens, every whisper, amplified Chuck's quiet authority and magnified the officer's shrinking control. The officer's jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. But deep down, he knew he had miscalculated. Every instinct told him this wasn't just a man. This was a legend, a force, a presence far beyond what he had imagined. And now, the tables were slowly starting to turn. If you were in the crowd, witnessing this moment, what would you do? Freeze, record, or step in? Comment your choice below. The street had gone silent, almost reverently. Phones were still recording, whispers rippling through the crowd, and every eye focused on the figure standing before the trembling officer. Chuck Norris, calm and unshakable, looked down the line of bystanders and then back at the cop whose hands were still hovering near his holster. Every second that passed, the officer's authority eroded further. Chuck's presence alone carried weight. Years of experience, discipline, and an aura of quiet strength seemed to radiate from him. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight. His calmness was already enough to command the room, and it was clear to everyone watching. "Officer," Chuck said, his voice low, steady, and piercing, "you have a badge, but that doesn't give you the right to threaten someone without cause. You have the authority to protect, not to intimidate." The officer's hands twitched. Sweat streamed down his forehead. He opened his mouth to respond, but found his voice faltering. Chuck's words were not a challenge in anger. They were a statement in truth, calm but undeniable. The crowd began to murmur, their voices blending with Chuck's words. "That's right. He's doing nothing wrong. Put the gun down." Chuck continued, taking a measured step closer, his gaze unwavering. "You draw your weapon to assert power, not understanding that power without respect is meaningless. And when you use fear to try to control someone, you show everyone around you what you truly are." The officer's face flushed with anger, shame, and confusion. The crowd's energy shifted from tension to near disbelief. People who were terrified moments ago were now leaning in, waiting for every word. Phones zoomed in, capturing every nuance. One bystander whispered, "He's not just calm, he's teaching a lesson." Chuck's voice, though calm, carried an undeniable authority. "I didn't provoke you. I did not resist. And yet, here you are, pointing a weapon at me in public. This isn't how justice works. Respect is earned through actions, not fear, not intimidation." The officer's hands shook visibly. He looked around, noticing the crowd's reactions for the first time. People weren't just observing, they were judging. Every camera, every phone, every pair of eyes was recording his misconduct. And the realization hit him. He was losing control. Fast. A woman in the crowd shouted, "Listen to him. He's right." Another voice rang out, "You're out of line." The officer tried to assert authority again, barking, "Step back." Now, but his voice cracked under the weight of Chuck's words and the crowd's judgment. His movements became erratic, unsure. The badge that had moments ago symbolized ultimate control now felt heavy, almost meaningless. Chuck's gaze didn't waver. He spoke again, softer this time, but with absolute conviction. Power is measured not by the weapon you carry, but by the restraint you show. Courage isn't in scaring others. It's in standing with integrity, even when no one is watching. That is strength. That is respect. The crowd gasped, murmuring, repeating the words. Some even recorded their own audio over Chuck's voice, knowing this moment was historic. The officer's hands trembled more. Every instinct screamed to reassert dominance, but the crowd's energy, Chuck's calm authority, and the undeniable truth of the moment made him hesitate. Every second he delayed, his control slipped further. Chuck glanced around, noting the faces of the bystanders, fearful, angry, but now inspired. "This is not about me," he said quietly, but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "This is about everyone here. Everyone watching. You should never allow fear or anger to dictate how you treat others. That is what justice looks like. Not intimidation, not aggression, but fairness and respect." The officer's lips trembled. He took an involuntary step back. The gun lowered slightly. His chest heaved, his authority collapsing under the weight of the moment. Chuck didn't move aggressively. He didn't need to. The silence, the calm, the moral authority, it spoke louder than any fight ever could. The crowd started clapping softly, then louder, some even cheering. They understood what was happening. The power dynamic had shifted completely. For the first time, the officer realized he had underestimated the man in front of him. Every threat, every aggressive motion, every unjust command was being documented. And the truth was clear. He was the one losing, not Chuck. The crowd's whispers grew into applause. Phones were everywhere. Chuck took a deep breath and finally stepped back slightly, hands still raised, his posture unshakable. The officer's jaw tightened, eyes darting, hands trembling. The realization hit fully. The situation had flipped entirely. The man he had tried to intimidate calmly, patiently, and powerfully had won without a single aggressive move. The turning moment had arrived, and the consequences for the cop were about to follow. If you think Chuck handled this perfectly without fighting back, type respect in the comments. Would you have stayed that calm? The street felt charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The crowd, already leaning forward in awe, now sensed the final act approaching. The officer, still trembling and confused, had begun to stagger under the weight of Chuck Norris's calm authority and the growing judgment of everyone around him. His gun, once a symbol of control, now shook violently in his hands. Every moment, every whisper, every recorded second chipped away at the illusion of power he had clung to so desperately. Then, in the distance, a new sound pierced the tension, the approaching wail of another police vehicle. The officer's gaze flicked nervously toward the siren, a faint tremor betraying his growing panic. Two more officers stepped out, badges gleaming under the streetlights, and one of them immediately recognized the figure standing calmly before them. "Sir, that's Chuck Norris," the backup officer exclaimed, voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you all right?" The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Phones zoomed in, capturing the moment in stunning clarity. Whispers surged like wildfire. "That's Chuck Norris, the martial arts legend. No way, he's calm as ever." The officer who had drawn his weapon froze completely. His eyes darted around, and the weight of realization hit him like a brick wall. He wasn't just facing an ordinary man anymore. He was facing a legend, someone whose reputation was known worldwide. And the entire crowd had seen every irrational, aggressive move he had made. Chuck Norris didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He merely kept his hands slightly raised, maintaining the same calm, unshakable demeanor that had dominated the encounter from the start. The backup officer, now fully aware of the situation, stepped between Chuck and the trembling officer. "Lower your weapon," he ordered firmly, his voice carrying authority. "Step away from him. Now." The officer's hands shook as he complied, slowly lowering the gun. His face was crimson, a mix of embarrassment, fear, and anger. The crowd murmured, some clapping, some laughing nervously, capturing every second. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. The aggressor was now exposed, The calm man was in control, and the public bore witness. Chuck spoke quietly but firmly, his voice carrying across the street. Threatening someone unjustly doesn't make you powerful. It only shows your weakness. Authority must be used responsibly. Respect is not given to those who intimidate. The crowd erupted in applause. Phones recorded the cheers, some people raising their hands in admiration. Children peeked out from behind their parents, eyes wide with awe. Even the backup officers exchanged glances, impressed by the composure Chuck displayed in the face of clear aggression. The first officer, realizing the enormity of the situation, tried to justify himself. I thought he was. But no one listened. The damage was done. The witnesses, the recordings, and the undeniable calm authority of Chuck Norris had made the truth undeniable. Within minutes, the backup officers had restrained the trembling officer. Bodycam footage would later reveal the full extent of his misconduct. Unlawful use of force, threatening a civilian, and endangering the public. By the time they led him toward the squad car, the crowd erupted into cheers, chanting, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" Chuck remained humble, raising a hand to quiet the applause. "This isn't about me," he said softly. "It's about the principle. No one should be threatened for simply following the law and acting with integrity. Respect is earned, not forced." The crowd's energy shifted from awe to inspiration. People began filming themselves, sharing the moment on social media. Tweets, live streams, and stories began spreading the encounter worldwide within minutes. Bystanders shouted praises for Chuck's patience and dignity, noting how a man who could have dominated physically instead chose moral authority and calm restraint. The first officer, now humiliated and handcuffed, realized he had become the very example of what Chuck had just described, an abuse of power exposed for all to see. People pointed, phones recording, while his own colleagues shook their heads in disappointment. Chuck's eyes scanned the crowd one final time. Calm, composed, and dignified, he reminded everyone, without needing to raise his voice, of what true strength looks like. If you think the cop finally got what he deserved, type respect in the comments. Would you have stayed as calm as Chuck? The street, which had been tense and charged with fear just moments ago, now buzzed with a completely different energy. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the whispers, the recordings, and the awe-filled murmurs didn't fade. Every bystander, every phone, every camera captured the events in detail, and within minutes, the footage began circulating online. Social media exploded. Clips of Chuck Norris standing calmly, even as a gun was pointed at him, spread like wildfire. Comments poured in. "How is he so calm? This is unbelievable. That cop got what he deserved." Within hours, hashtags like hashtag Chuck Norris calm, hashtag respect over fear, and hashtag justice served began trending worldwide. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "Legend stays calm as officer draws gun, public watches in awe. Chuck Norris shows the true meaning of strength and respect. Cop arrested after threatening martial arts icon." The officer who had drawn his weapon faced immediate consequences. His misconduct was documented, witnessed by hundreds, and recorded on multiple phones. The police department issued a public statement acknowledging the wrongdoing. The officer was suspended and charged with unlawful use of force, endangering a civilian, and misconduct. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive toward Chuck. People praised not just his martial arts legacy, but the way he handled an intense situation with dignity and composure. Thousands of comments highlighted the lesson he had taught. Strength is not about intimidation. It's about control, patience, and moral authority. Even politicians, celebrities, and influencers shared the story, emphasizing the importance of respecting civilians, no matter the circumstance. Memes spread online, showing Chuck standing tall while the cop looked flustered, often captioned, "Power without respect is nothing." Despite the attention and worldwide praise, Chuck remained humble. He didn't post angry messages, gloat, or make threats. Instead, he offered a brief statement that captured the heart of the story. Strength is not in the weapon you carry. Courage is not in making others fear you. True power is measured by restraint, integrity, and the respect you show every single day. His words resonated globally. Parents showed the video to their children, teaching lessons in patience and respect. Teachers used it as an example in schools to explain moral authority, and the importance of dignity under pressure. Martial artists analyzed his composure, not just his physical skill, marveling at how control and calmness can diffuse the most dangerous situations. Meanwhile, the public continued to debate what would have happened if Chuck had reacted aggressively. The consensus was unanimous. The calm, measured response was far more powerful. Millions of people shared their admiration, highlighting how one man's integrity had taught the world a lesson about authority, fear, and respect. Chuck's handling of the situation became a global symbol, a reminder that justice is not enforced through intimidation, and real strength lies in patience and moral courage. The video became iconic, not for a fight, not for action, but for demonstrating the quiet power of dignity in the face of aggression. In the end, the officer's humiliation was complete. Arrested, disciplined, and publicly exposed, he became an example of what happens when authority is abused. Chuck, on the other hand, remained a beacon of calm, inspiring millions to approach conflict with integrity rather than aggression. If you believe no one should be threatened or judged unfairly, type respect in the comments. Share this story and subscribe for more real-life lessons in courage, patience, and integrity.